On the morning of September 3rd, 1792, something unspeakable was happening in the streets of Paris. A woman's severed head was being paraded on a pike. Her hair had been carefully styled, her face had been powdered, her lips had been painted with rouge. But this wasn't just any woman. This was the head of Princess de Lamballe, the Queen of France's closest friend, and the killers were bringing it to show Marie Antoinette through her prison window. The streets of Paris reeked of blood and revenge that day. The revolution had been raging for 3 years, but nothing had prepared the city for what would become known as the September Massacres. Behind the cold walls of the Temple prison, Marie Antoinette stood by her window. She could hear the crowd approaching. Their voices grew louder with each passing moment. She had no idea what horror they were bringing to her. Princess Marie-Thérèse Louise de Lamballe was only 42 years old. Her beauty was legendary throughout Europe. With her golden hair, sapphire eyes, and elegant bearing, she had been one of Versailles' most admired women. But now that beauty had become the victim of unspeakable brutality. Let me take you back to understand who this woman really was. Born in Turin in 1749, Marie-Thérèse was a member of the House of Savoy. At 17, she married the Prince de Lamballe, one of France's wealthiest men. But her husband died just 1 year later from syphilis, leaving her a widow at 20. The young widow came to Versailles, and there she met another lonely young princess from Austria, Marie Antoinette. The friendship that blossomed between these two young women would last 18 years. When Marie Antoinette became queen, she appointed Lamballe to the most important position in her household, superintendent of the queen's household. This wasn't just a ceremonial position. It came with an annual salary of 150,000 livres. She knew all the queen's secrets, and those secrets would one day become her death warrant. When the revolution exploded in 1789, Lamballe was safely in England. Even King Louis XVI told her not to return. But the princess refused to abandon her friend. "I cannot be safe while my queen is in danger," she said, and she returned to Paris. That decision would cost her everything. By August 1792, the monarchy had fallen. The royal family was imprisoned in the Temple Tower, and anyone associated with them was marked for death. Princess de Lamballe was arrested on August 10th, the same day the Tuileries Palace was stormed. The charges were vague but deadly: conspiracy against the people and being the criminal accomplice of the Austrian woman. That's what they called Marie Antoinette now. The Austrian woman, the enemy of France. For 3 weeks, Lamballe was held in La Petite Force prison. The conditions were horrific. The cells were overcrowded, filthy, and disease-ridden. But the princess maintained her dignity. Other prisoners later testified that she shared her meager food rations and comforted those who were terrified. She had to know what was coming. The streets outside echoed with bloodthirsty chants. Marat's newspaper called daily for the extermination of all aristocrats. The sans-culottes, the radical working-class revolutionaries, gathered outside the prisons, demanding blood. And then came September 2nd, 1792. What triggered the September Massacres was fear. Word had spread that the Prussian army was advancing on Paris. The revolutionaries believed that the prisoners, especially the aristocrats, would break free and join the invaders. Paranoia gripped the city. Marat wrote in his newspaper, "The people must take justice into their own hands." And they did. But what happened to the Princess de Lamballe wasn't justice. It was something far darker. On the evening of September 2nd, the killings began at the Abbey prison. By morning, the mob had moved to La Force. They set up what they called people's tribunals in the prison courtyards. These weren't real courts. They were theatrical performances of revolutionary justice. where the verdict was predetermined. At 10 o'clock on the morning of September 3rd, Princess de Lamballe was dragged from her cell. She could barely walk. 3 weeks of imprisonment had weakened her, but witnesses said she held her head high as she was brought before the tribunal. The prosecutor was Jacques-Claude Bernard, a wine merchant who had appointed himself judge. He sat behind a blood-stained table. The jury was the mob itself, armed with pikes, sabers, and axes. Bernard asked her, "Do you renounce your loyalty to the king and queen?" Lamballe replied, "I have sworn an oath to the king. The queen is my friend. I cannot deny them." The courtyard fell silent. Everyone knew what this answer meant. "Swear the oath of liberty," Bernard said. "Curse the aristocracy." "I will swear the oath of liberty," the princess said. "But I cannot curse my friends." Bernard stood up. "Take the woman outside. Let her go." These words were the code of the September Massacres. Let her go meant lynch her. When the door opened, the crowd outside was ready. They held axes, knives, and pikes, and their eyes burned with bloodlust. What happened next has been documented by multiple witnesses, though their accounts differ in the horrific details. A man named Charlotte struck first with a pike to the back of her head. The princess fell to her knees. Then the crowd descended upon her like wild animals. But here's where the accounts become even more disturbing. After she was dead, they didn't stop. The crowd stripped her body naked. They mutilated it in ways I cannot fully describe. They cut out her heart, and then they severed her head. But the horror wasn't over. The hairdresser in the crowd was ordered to style the princess's hair. They wanted her to look presentable for the queen. They applied makeup to her face, rouge on her cheeks, color to her lips. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated cruelty. Then they mounted her head on a pike and began their procession to the temple tower. The man carrying the pike was named Francois Nicolas. He would later boast about it in taverns. Behind him, others carried her heart and other body parts on pikes. The crowd sang revolutionary songs as they marched through the streets. Citizens watched from their windows in horror, but none dared intervene. At the temple tower, the municipal guards saw them coming. They knew exactly what the mob intended. These guards had orders to protect the royal family, but they also feared the crowd. The mob demanded that Marie Antoinette be brought to the window. The guards tried to refuse, but the crowd grew violent, threatening to storm the tower. Inside, Marie Antoinette heard the commotion. She asked what was happening. The guards tried to keep her away from the windows, but she heard someone in the crowd shout, "We've brought you the head of Lamballe. Come and kiss your friend." Different accounts exist of what happened next. Some say Marie Antoinette fainted before reaching the window. Others say she saw the head and collapsed. The king's sister, Madame Elizabeth, definitely saw it and tried to shield the queen's daughter from the sight. But young Marie-Thérèse, the future Duchess of Angoulême, saw everything. She would later write in her memoirs, "They held the head up to our window. My mother's friend, her beautiful face. What they had done to her, I still see it in my nightmares." 40 years later, the crowd stayed outside the temple for 2 hours, dancing, singing, waving the head. Then they took their trophy on a tour of Paris. They stopped at the Palais Royal, where the Duke of Orleans, the king's own cousin, who had joined the revolution, was forced to look at it. Witnesses said he turned pale and retreated inside. The head was displayed at various locations throughout the day. Finally, as evening fell, what remained of the princess was dumped in a mass grave at the Foundlings Cemetery. No prayers were said. No marker was placed. Her body was never found. But the story doesn't end there. The man who struck the first blow, Charlotte, died 3 months later. He went insane, claiming he saw the princess's ghost every night. He died screaming her name. François Nicolas, who carried her head, was found dead in his apartment 6 months later. The cause of death was never determined. Jacques-Claude Bernard, the judge who condemned her, was himself executed during the terror, just 1 year later. In fact, of the 23 men identified as participants in Lamballe's murder, 17 died violent deaths within 2 years. Coincidence, or something else? Marie Antoinette never recovered from the shock. Prison guards reported that she aged 10 years in that single day. Her hair began turning white. When she was executed 13 months later, witnesses said she showed no fear. "I go to join my friend," were reportedly among her last words. But there's one more twist to this story. In 1796, 4 years after the murder, a woman appeared in Germany, claiming to be Princess de Lamballe. She said she had survived the attack, that another woman had died in her place. She knew intimate details about the princess's life that only Lamballe could have known. Several former servants of Versailles who met her swore she was genuine. The woman lived quietly in Hamburg for 20 years, never seeking money or fame. She died in 1816, taking her secrets to the grave. Was she the real Princess de Lamballe? Had there been a substitution? Or was she simply a talented impostor? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that the murder of Princess de Lamballe marked a turning point in the French Revolution. Even supporters of the revolution were horrified by the brutality. The British Parliament condemned it. The American ambassador called it a stain upon humanity. The September Massacres claimed over 1,400 lives in 5 days. But none was more symbolic than the Princess de Lamballe. She wasn't killed for what she had done. She was killed for who she was, and who she refused to stop being. In 2019, French archaeologists believed they found fragments of the princess's remains during excavations at the Foundlings Cemetery site. DNA testing was planned to compare with living descendants of the House of Savoy, but the tests were never completed. The French government intervened, declaring the site a place of memory that should not be disturbed. Some say they feared what might be discovered. Others believe they wanted to let the dead rest in peace. Today, there's a small plaque on the Rue de l'Arbre Sec in Paris. It marks the spot where the princess was murdered. Fresh flowers appear there regularly, left by unknown hands. The monarchy is long gone. The revolution is history. But someone still remembers the woman who chose loyalty over life. The Princess de Lamballe reminds us that in times of mass hysteria and political violence, it's often personal loyalty and human friendship that become the greatest crimes. She could have saved herself with a few words of denunciation. Instead, she chose to die as she had lived, with dignity, with loyalty, and with love for a friend the world had turned against. The September Massacres would continue for 3 more days after her death, but no other killing would match the calculated cruelty of what was done to the princess. It was as if the mob had exhausted its capacity for horror, or perhaps even they realized they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The French Revolution would claim many more victims. The terror would consume even its own architects. Marat would be assassinated. Danton would be guillotined. Robespierre would follow. But of all the revolution's victims, Princess de Lamballe stands apart. She was killed not for conspiracy, not for treason, not for crimes against the Republic. She was killed for friendship. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying lesson of all. When revolution turns to madness, when fear becomes bloodlust, when crowds become mobs, it's not ideas that die first. It's love. It's loyalty. It's the simple human bonds that hold us together. The Princess de Lamballe knew this. She could have stayed safe in England. She could have denounced her friend. She could have sworn any oath they demanded, but she didn't. And for that refusal, she paid the ultimate price. Her last words before the tribunal have echoed through history. I cannot curse my friends. In an age of betrayal, she remained faithful. In a time of madness, she stayed sane. In a moment of cowardice, she showed courage. And that's why, 232 years later, someone still leaves flowers where she died. Someone still remembers. Someone still honors the woman who wouldn't betray her friend, even unto death.